Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Justin actually was from the cold. He was from Portland, Maine, and grew up in the Boston area, so he knows all about the snow, I'm sure. He's a student of physics, psychology, and spirituality, and has been searching for truth all of his life, looking to make sense of all the insanity in this world. You are on the right show. In that time, he has developed a holistic body of knowledge, linking science, philosophy, and spirituality into a single framework of ever-expanding understanding. Justin wants to share what he has with the world, becoming a teacher to some and a student to others. His goal is to help as many others becoming truth seekers, and with the wisdom gained in the process, make this planet the paradise it was meant to be. Yes, you're definitely on the right show. So welcome to the show, Justin. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Bernard. It's a pleasure.
And please forgive me. I'm not saying your last name because so many people say it differently. How do you say your last name?
Well, I say Deschamps in New England.
That's what I normally would say. Somebody corrected me up here. So just Deschamps, welcome to the show. And we're very happy to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Yeah, and I just wanted to say I'm actually in Virginia. So we're not too far. Yeah, I'm right near Charlottesville. So
okay. For some reason I thought you were down there with Jeremy.
right.
Okay. So you're close to Charlottesville. Very cool.
Yeah, we're pretty close. And it was pretty cold last night for Virginia terms, but not nearly as cold as it was in Canada, it sounds like.
Yes, It sounds like, exactly. So Justin, why don't we start at the beginning? This is the first time that my audience might have met you and hearing about your work. Tell us a little bit about your story. How did this get started? What was the spark that drew you onto this path, and some of the experiences that led you to do the work you're doing now?
Sure. Well, let's see. I would say my kind of journey began many, many years ago when I was a young child. I was fortunate enough to have two parents that doted me with long hours of conversation and indulged my curiosity, which gave me a love for learning at a very early age. And I wasn't too spiritual back then, and I actually was exposed to religion and kind of thought it wasn't representative of what I thought was happening in reality, so I kind of threw everything out with it. And then many years later, after I'd gotten very deep into science and psychology, I saw a film called The Gerson Miracle in 2010, and that was talking about cures for cancer. And I thought, well, obviously if there were cures for cancer, we would know about them. That's the usual standard fare we hear for these kind of things. And well, so I decided to research it to disprove it to myself, and I ended up proving it to myself. And then once that happened, that's what really catalyzed my consciousness. And then since then, I've been studying everything I can get my hands on.
Oh, so that was, I guess, your aha moment when you realized it was all an illusory matrix.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that can be very frustrating, actually. So as that opened you up to perhaps, let's say, seeing, I hate to say, I don't want to sound too cliche, but seeing through the matrix, understanding. That helped you, I should say, did it help you to understand the current paradigm, the current monetary system, the current political system, and perhaps the suppression of consciousness?
Certainly it did. And I would say it was what I would call a meta lesson, in the sense that learning about the fact that there were cures for cancer revealed that there's what I call a manufactured reality. that is overlaid on top of the real reality that we experience every day. And that manufactured reality resides in here. So it's acting like a kind of a smokescreen on our own perception that makes us see the world in a certain way. And when I realized that that was happening when it came to cures for cancer, then I started to ask, okay, well, what else is being hidden from us? And as you were mentioning, I mean, it runs the gambit between government corruption, the monetary system, the legal system, I mean, law, spirituality. I mean, there's a million different topics you could name. So once I started to see that, yes, this is a pretty big trend in a lot of different areas, I started to ask myself, well, what is the goal? What is the aim to all this? And in my understanding, I think the Matrix analogy is fantastic because what's basically happened is we have a parasitic elite that has taken over our unique creative essence and uses that to its own end while we run in the kind of the hamster wheel of society and the Matrix, so to speak. So with that knowledge in mind, I started to ask myself, okay, well, what can I do to try to help the situation? And I discovered early on that really it starts with the individual, raising them up, giving them the love and the support they need, and helping them to use their skills that were given from what I would say is the creator to think, to feel, to empathize, and to use our consciousness in a masterful way to help remake the world into the world we want to live in.
Right on, and I totally agree with you. I find that, and I'm wondering if this has been your experience or what you feel, what your feelings are on this, is that I find that many people, once they have this awakening or understanding of what you're talking about, the false reality that's basically the wool that's being pulled before our eyes, the parasitic elite, there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of how shall we say, motivation to change it and to change it right now. That we have to change the world right now. And a lot of people get involved in activism, as I myself did and still am, even though my style may have changed over the last 10 years. But the reason why I'm saying this is because you mentioned that it starts from the way that we think. And I know many people, when they wake up, they would disagree with you. They'd be like, no, we have to stop the crazy elite people. What is your fundamental idea of why it does begin with the way that we think? I agree with you, by the way.
Sure. Well, I would say that, let's see, I don't know how esoteric I want to get, but, from a natural law perspective or the mechanics of the universe, the way that things manifest into the world starts in the realm of ideas and consciousness. And then we take those ideas and consciousness and flesh them out and do things with them in the world. So what the powers that be have done is they've mastered the technique of manipulating our consciousness so that we create the world that they want. So to kind of use an analogy, it's very similar to, well, instead of trying to, if somebody was just in an injury, instead of trying to just, clean up the blood around the wound, what you want to do is you want to get into the wound and actually seal and heal the artery that may have been cut. And that's kind of what I think is happening with consciousness, is that when we change our consciousness, when we begin to do that inner work and become metacognitive or become cognition or gain cognition of our own consciousness and how we're thinking, how we're feeling, how we're processing information, how our beliefs affect reality, then we can start to see the reality that's actually there opposed to the matrix. And the reason why that's critically important is the powers that be knew that the veneer of reality or the manufactured reality wouldn't be enough to keep people in check. So they created a whole bunch of other layers like an onion, so that as soon as you think you've woken up from one layer, there's another layer to trap you. So if you think, well, it's all about just financial corruption, it's really nobody's trying to do anything insidious, it's just people trying to make money. Well, that's the one layer of the onion. Then as soon as you think that's the problem, there's another layer to look at. So if you're not starting from within, which is kind of like at the core of the onion, then you're raging against trying to change the outside world without realizing that the cause of all of it is inside of us. So by looking inside and doing that inner work, not only do we make our lives more fulfilling, not only do we heal our traumas and master our creative potential, which is seemingly limitless, but then we can also literally change the world one person at a time. And then when we come together as individuals to form communities, that's when the magic really starts to happen.
Yes, yes, and I finally see that happening now. Or I'm starting to see, like you mentioned, people forming communities. And geez, I think that's how we started Triva. We had the Global Illumination Council, and all of a sudden we had 40,000 members wanting the same thing, wanting to peel away those layers of the onion. And and like you said, many times we begin to see more and more, and that can drive people a little bit crazy. When
Yes.
you begin to see the financial corruption, when you begin to see the political corruption, the spiritual corruption that we have going on, and you know, mainstream religion, pollution, the poisoning of the planet, you know, the list goes on and on and on and on. And I know for me, I wanted to fix everything at once, and I tried to focus on everything at once, and that just doesn't work. And I really, really align with what you're saying, that it really is about the way that we look at the world, the way that we perceive the world. Ideally, I feel that it's by going inward to find our authentic self and listen to developing that relationship with our higher self, that we allow our intuition to come through in order for us to live the most fulfilling life we can in any one particular way, whether that is becoming vegan, whether that is not shopping at Walmart anymore, whether it is
Right.
not being a Democrat or Republican anymore, whatever it is. I mean, well, we're never going to be perfect, and we'll drive ourselves crazy if we try to become perfect. So it's about, like you said, the perception and not giving power to those things. I like to think of it as, I call it harm reduction, going into that space where you do the best you
Hmm.
can, go into harm reduction, because it's not going to change in one day, unfortunately. And I've seen, you know, speaking of other matrices, I've seen where people are like, well, you know, the Greys are coming, or the, you know, the
Right.
Arcturians are landing in Mexico, and they're going to send all of us tomorrow, and it'll be better. And it's not going to happen like that.
No.
At least what tell us tell us a little bit about how you see that. How is this ascension process coming into fruition? And I mean, I know, like I said, it's going to take time, but what are some of the things and some of the levels that you see happening or you're sensing?
Sure. Well, it's that the answer to that question has evolved since I began my awakening. I initially thought, like many people out there, that 2012 was going to be this big, kind of quick, catalyzing event, and we were going to wake up the next day and be ascended, and all the problems were just disappeared. Well, obviously that didn't happen, so I started to question. Okay, well, maybe there's a different way to think about this, and it was around the same time I started studying law a lot. And I came to understand through reading a book called the Urantia book that really the evolution of consciousness is more about the evolution of ideas and what we do with those ideas. So, what I mean by that is all of the things that we experience as hardship and trepidation and problems in our lives is at a kind of a spiritual level, at a layer very high above the time space creation, is all meant for the evolution of our growth. So the idea that that's either ETs or something was going to take all of that away from us, and we were going to live in a paradise, it seemed like a contradiction to this principle that seemed reflected in a lot of areas. I mean, you're from a psychological perspective, the way that our beingness unfolds, so to speak, is through meeting challenge. I mean, the birth experience itself, you go from being in the womb to totally loved and embraced, to going into the world, which is very new. And when you meet that challenge, and then the mother takes the child and holds the baby to the chest, that creates a bonding experience, which actually unfolds and unpacks the consciousness, and it begins that process of embracing the mystery, embracing the unknown, so that they can have the tools to grow up to be wise people. So I think from a consciousness shift perspective, the harder thing to accept is that despite the fact all these horrible things seem to be happening to us and we didn't ask for them, the only way out is through. The only way out is to embrace the challenges, use our creative faculties, which will come to the fore once we do so, and then all start to slowly work together to bring about the new age that we want to see. And in my opinion, that seems like a much more fulfilling experience than just having a snap of the fingers ascension event.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's almost as if those who believe that, and I mean, I went through that same belief as well. Gosh, what was it, 2008 or 9? Do you remember Blossom Goodchild?
I
Tree.
do.
Okay. I remember running out that one day in November, waiting for the ships to, fly over. And she was like,
Right.
they're coming. She said there's something about New Orleans. I don't remember, Phoenix or Arizona. I forgot what she was saying, but she was talking about how they were coming. And that was my moment of, it's almost as if, I guess, well, we've only got about 2 more minutes. So I'll try to say this thought real quick. Um, when I had my spiritual awakening, mine was done through a shamanic vision quest, and I was very lucky to have a great teacher to kind of work me through it, even though I was young and inexperienced. But anyway, after the vision quest, my teacher, I was like, "Oh, I want to do it again." Well, I'll have to finish this thought at the end of the break. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show. If you've been watching, I don't know if you've noticed, I turned some lights on, so hopefully that helps. But anyway, welcome back to the show. Before the break, I was speaking with Justin Deschamps about, well, we were talking about Ascension and how, the aliens aren't going to, help us all ascend and wake up one day. It's not going to happen overnight. And I was telling the story of my spiritual, my shamanic experience, and how afterward I was speaking to actually the shaman that I was speaking, who was helping me guide me through some of the stuff. And I was like, oh, I want to experience that again. It was amazing. I was able to leave my body. I met, that's when I met the emissaries of light. I connected with my guides. And he said, no, no, you already, now you took the helicopter to the top of the mountain. So now you know the ground, you know the terrain, you know the path, you saw the path. Now it's time to walk up the path. We have to go through it. We have to go through the experience. And I appreciate what you were saying about that, Justin.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to describe it too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, you have on your website, I was looking, you have a video actually. It was about disclosure, but you had mentioned something about collective truth seeking, and that really rung with me. It really resonated with me. And I was hoping you could define that a little bit more for us. And what do you mean by collective truth seeking?
Sure. Well, collective truth seeking in my mind is the act of engaging with others to form a understanding of the truth, basically. And from an individual perspective, we do our best to try to understand reality. But let's face it, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. I don't care how long you've been in the truth-seeking game, so to speak. There is an endless ocean of things that you need to get clarity on and understand better because your knowledge is limited. So from a kind of a grand spiritual perspective, and I guess you could say like an esoteric perspective, is that we are finite beings. We have a beginning, and we accumulate knowledge and experience over time. Well, the truth is infinite. It's unbounded. So because of that, we're always going to be striving to understand the truth. Just when you've come to an understanding about some great level of truth, there's a whole ocean more of truth to discover and understand. So what that means as well is that we each have a different perspective on that one truth, that one infinite truth. And when we come together to take advantage of your unique faculties and wisdom and experience, then it's kind of like pieces of a puzzle coming together. We each come to the table with one piece, and if we really do our work and try to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, I think this is what I know, but what do you think? Then now that piece can link up with somebody else's piece, and it starts to create what I call a tapestry of truth. And what's interesting is that because our minds can absorb other people's information, we can literally start to expand our consciousness just by engaging in honest, open discussions with other people. And instead of trying to force your truth onto another person, what's a better perspective to have, in my view, is to come together as more like a chorus or a symphony. And the things that all the statements and the perspectives slowly weave together to form the best possible description of truth that then everybody can use to impart into their minds. And now that becomes like a lens to see the world in a more clear way. And then it feeds back on itself. It's a continuous loop. So I think that's the power of collective truth seeking. And The other thing I'll just mention on this is that the other thing that happens as a kind of a side effect to that is you build rapport, you build trust with the other people that are on this path. You have a meeting of the minds. And from a lawful perspective, all manifestation, all wealth creation, all capital, all things in society and life come together through individuals merging their minds together to come to for some group purpose. So I think with collective truth seeking, we have a great opportunity to create an amazing foundation in consciousness to do this world healing work that I think is paramount.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That opens a whole can of worms for me because I'm thinking, well, what about if these people are collectively thinking that an illusion is real? So that's like a whole a whole nother can of worms. But if we're dealing, like you said, if we're dealing with people that are serious about consciousness and evolving and healing the planet, that is certainly very, very helpful. I I can't help but feel that, like you said, when we do share with each other, but many people seem to be afraid to share with each other. Many people seem to be ashamed of saying what they're feeling, saying what they're thinking. I don't know if you get this, but I always get emails and letters from people saying, "Thank you for sharing or saying what I'm afraid to say." And I think there's a certain, I don't want to say fear. Maybe it's a certain, well, fear of being embarrassed or fear of being ridiculed, that people are tapping into this infinite clarity, this infinite wisdom, but something, whether it be societal, familial, religious, spiritual, political, that is blocking them. And I can't help but wonder, what are your thoughts on perhaps moving beyond that fear of expressing and connecting with others of like mind?
That's a great question. I would say that part of the issue with sharing your truth is the nature of the collective reality we live in. And in order to kind of understand that, I think looking at psychology is really important. I study psychology quite a bit because I think it's one of the three essential tenets to really understanding ourselves. I would say psychology, philosophy, and law are some of, if you can get a good handle on those things and study those, even though they may not be the most shiny and interesting, you're going to have an incredible amount of self-knowledge and tools in consciousness to work with. And one of the things that I discovered in my studies of psychology in particular is that, well, because of how we're raised and how society and culture influences us, our reputation is everything. We need to be really careful about the inner truths and the inner experience we're having. So think about it kind of like an inner temple, a middle temple, and an outer temple. When you're out in the world and you don't know who somebody is, you kind of have to, for self-defense reasons, put out a veneer of like, well, I'm going to keep my secrets close to my chest, so to speak, until I know I can trust somebody with these secrets. And then we have a little dialogue with them and try to figure out, okay, well, where are they at? What are they interested in? Maybe I'd give a little bit of drip here to see what their response is, and kind of bring that into the middle temple where we're having that dialogue. And then once we feel like a lot of trust has been gained, then we can kind of start to share those inner truths. So I think part of the issue is that for a lot of people, they just don't have that experience. There may not be any single person that they feel like they can trust with their inner life. Not necessarily about, big grand conspiracies or things, but just your inner perspectives on lives, which we usually keep very close to our chests. So I would say, as far as some tips on how to change that, is, first of all, spend some time reflecting on your own experience. Become what I call metacognitive, which is become aware of your own awareness, your own consciousness, how you think about ideas. Why do you believe what you believe? How do you know that what you believe is actually true? And are you willing to engage in a more open discussion with that? And if once you gain that internal confidence, then that's going to give you a clarity of vision to see, well, can I really trust another person? And I think ultimately, one of the things that holds us back is that deep down we realize that sharing these ideas around the wrong kind of people could lead to disaster. I mean, let's face it, we're living in a world where your reputation is the difference between life and death. If you don't have a good reputation, if you can't get a job, if you can't work with other people in society, then you're an outcast. And I mean, nobody wants to be an outcast. So that's a really critically important thing to think about. And the other thing to think about as well is that self-acceptance, and the acceptance that other people have of us. I mean, obviously, we don't want to place the right to judge our character in somebody else's hands, but at the same time, we need that community. We're meant to be social creatures. So having the ability to share our truths and our wisdom in a way that builds that community space is very important. And I think this is one project that I've been working on over the past 6 months, kind of behind the scenes, is how do I address this issue that you were mentioning, is that there's all these people who are going through these profound spiritual shifts, but we're all kind of isolated in our own little bubbles. How can we kind of pop those bubbles and bring ourselves together into a collective for not only the great work of changing the world, but also giving ourselves the emotional and spiritual and intellectual support we need to grow as individuals?
I'll tell you, and it's not an easy. It's actually not an easy question to answer at all. I find that even as I'm listening to you, my spirit is saying, "Oh well, we really don't care about what other people think. Our spirit is true. It's pure. Who cares what other people think?" And I look back on my own work. I've been doing this show now for, I think it's gonna be 10 years next year, and maybe more, I don't know, but I remember those first couple of years being scared to death to get in front of the camera, being scared to death to get on the air, to be able to share my truth. And actually, if you go to my earlier shows, you can hear my voice shaking. And I just find that as much as we want to be at the end of the path, and when I say the end of the path, I mean being connected to our higher selves, being connected to that place where we can actually be our authentic selves. There is that process. And so I like what you're saying, to be aware of the process and to allow ourselves to go through the process in order to feel comfortable. It's important not to get what I call psychic whiplash, which actually happened to me as well. So going through the process is definitely the way to go through it. Now, you mentioned something, and it's kind of a thorn in my side, and it's happening a lot lately. Well, it's been going on, but more so now, is the conspiracy world. And yes, there are horrible things going on out there. Yes, our water's being polluted and nobody cares, and people are just in it for the money. And gosh only knows how many, what's going on behind the scenes with these quote unquote global elites. I hate to use the word elite for them, but the hidden ones, for lack of a better term. But and we've had shows on it, especially with like Miriam Delicato and several other people that have been in the movement for quite a while now, talking about discernment. And I saw a great video maybe last week or something where it showed what happens when you use discernment and what happens when you don't use discernment. And I believe they used the example of, Muslims blew up something, and like it shows the example of somebody did the work and researched it versus someone who just got outraged and reacted and shared it with everybody, building more and more outrage, building more and more outrage. So what are some of the tools that you perhaps use personally in order to incorporate discernment into the truths that you allow into your consciousness?
Certainly, that's a fantastic question. Well, arguably, discernment is one of the most critical things that you could ever gain a mastery of. I mean, everything that we do in our reality is a function of how well we know the truth. So in that sense, you could think of the truth as the world and your knowledge as the map of the world. So obviously, if you want to get from point A to point B, if your map is inaccurate, you're going to not get to where you want to go, or you're not going to be able to build what you want to build, if we want to think about it as terms of a blueprint. So discernment is, I would say, to sum it up simply, is the act of progressively making more accurate your representations of the world. And that requires an active consciousness. In a kind of an academic sense, the term for this is called epistemology. So epistemology is the study of knowledge itself. It's a philosophy study. So it asks questions like, well, how do we know that something is true or not? How do you know that For example, that the Earth is round. How do you know that you're alive right now? How do you know that there's actually conspiracy out there? How do you know that a false flag is really a false flag? I mean, from a conspiracy perspective, these events happen, like let's say the Las Vegas shooting, and it seems very obvious that this wasn't what it purported to be. But how do we really know what is actually there? That's a much broader question. So the tools that I use for discernment is, well, first taking the statement, okay, well, what is the claim? What is being said? Then I ask, okay, well, now that I've gotten a good handle on what that is, now I'm going to ask, well, how do I know that this is true or not? Is there any evidence to support this? And then I ask the next question, which is, well, what is it's evidence itself telling me? So it's a process where you're looking at a claim and then you're reflecting on what that says, so you get a good idea of what is in your mind. And then once you have that solid idea in your mind, now you have something to compare against and look for in reality. So for example, if we'll use something really simple, like if I said it's raining outside, well, how would you know that that statement is true? You'd probably go through an investigation process. You'd probably turn around and maybe look out your window and say, well, let me take a look. Is it actually raining outside? You'd gain visual evidence, and that visual evidence would be recorded in your mind as a record that then you could use to compare against reality, or compare against the statement that it's raining and say, well, actually it does look like it's raining outside. There seems to be a correspondence, that things link up. A equals A in this case. So the more we can do that, the more that we can keep making that process more refined and detailed, then that's when we start to build really clear maps of the world. And with those maps, we can better understand everything. That's kind of like the foundation to almost everything.
That's a great outline, actually. I'm sitting here thinking about my definition. Well, I won't say my definition of discernment, but I'm much more critical than you are. I come from a very Taoist perspective, I guess, for lack of a better term, and I'm very weary of what I allow myself to believe. Now, it's very important for us to do research. So I love what you're saying, because that's a wonderful step-by-step process for discernment into research. But I especially align with what you're saying about the raining. One of the tricks that I use myself is if I'm not there, or if I don't know about someone who was there, let's say on the ground. That's one of the things I love, by the way, about Occupy Wall Street and all this live streaming, all the activism and stuff. We can actually see somebody on the ground and see what's actually going on versus relying on mainstream media. So, for example, when someone, the mainstream media says, Donald Trump did this, or Bill Clinton did this, or Bernie Sanders did this, or Jill Stein did this, or whatever, I wasn't there. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Did I experience it? Did I perceive the action with my own eyes? Or is there somebody on the ground there with them who I trust was able to perceive that action with their own eyes, and that I trust their interpretation of what they saw? So I'm anything beyond that, I consider speculation. So while we do have to live in a world of speculation, I mean, I've never been on the moon, so I can't say that the world is round, and I don't want to give it to the whole flat earther thing. Right. But I can speculate that there is enough evidence, trustworthy evidence, for me to speculate and lean on the side of the earth is round, for example. But I love that. I love the way that you worked it out number by number, so to speak. We're not seeing your camera for some reason, so I hope you don't mind. I'm just using pretty images of the
sure.
site.
Yeah, we had a technical glitch a little
while. What do they call that? The spinning wheel of death. But
oh, really? Okay.
But at least we hear you. You sound great. So moving on, we've got about 6 more minutes left. And speaking of speculation, I know that you did speak about disclosure on one of your videos, and of course that was the first one I noticed, was disclosure. And again, something that is either speculative or we actually have the experience or the knowledge, the first-hand knowledge. What are your thoughts on disclosure How do you feel about, all these people channeling? I'm one of these people that are channeling Arcturians, but nobody's seen them. Only I've seen them. So yeah, I can trust them, and people love the knowledge that comes through them in my book and whatnot. But how much of it is speculation, and how much of it is actually going back to the disclosure? Uh, do we need to rely on government to disclose, or is it a one-on-one experience? What are your thoughts?
Certainly a great question. I would say, let's see. Well, I just want to mention that the video that I did, Disclosure Consciousness, The Truth Changes Us in the World, is a really good kind of much more detailed description of what I'm about to discuss about discernment. So, but yes, as far as speculation and intuition, these are critical aspects of discernment, I think. And so it's not just a kind of a left brain, purely logical, no intuitions aspect. It's actually both working together to come to form what I call holistic consciousness. And part of that is being willing to entertain many different ideas at once. So, when it comes to channeling and some of the more fringe information, I guess you could say, because we don't have a lot of evidence, then the information has to be judged on, well, how well does it describe reality in your best estimation? And you have to be willing to what I call provisional beliefs, which is, well, I don't know if this is really true, but I'm going to put it in the maybe category. I'm going to act as if it is for a little while, and I'm going to test it and see what happens and see how it affects my consciousness. Does it affect my ability to see the world more clearly? That kind of thing. So as far as disclosure is concerned, I think it would be short-sighted to assume that we are going to have a complete and total disclosure at the hands of government and the powers that be. It seems a little, naive to think that. However, there does seem to be now a lot of things coming out into the public, and it could be argued that this is part of a kind of what has been termed soft or partial disclosure, which is they're releasing things because they're trying to change upgrade the fake reality, so to speak, so that we can have a different version of the Matrix. So that's arguable that is happening. So I think combining what's being released from the mainstream and military and government with an organic grassroots disclosure is really important. So instead of just kind of drinking the Kool-Aid from the government, so to speak, we're asking those critical discernment questions. Well, how do we know that this is true? Is this the whole story? What about all these other things? For example, one really good thing about discernment that you can wrap your head around is, well, is a statement or a claim describing all of the available phenomenon? If it's not describing all of the examples in reality that we can see that relate to that, then it's probably not a complete truth at the very best, or at the very worst, it's a complete fabrication, and it's totally unwarranted. So I think when we hear about these disclosures coming from government, we need to ask ourselves, well, is there more to the story? And why are they telling us this? And what is the reality that is kind of being manufactured for us? And ultimately, I think the great disclosures that we want to see in the world aren't going to come from the government. They're going to come from people like me and you, from people that are listening to the show, the people that probably feel like they may not play a big part. But in my estimation, everybody, absolutely everybody, is an essential part of the work that we're all doing together. And the sooner you can recognize that in yourself and step into that space, the greater everybody's life is going to be, in my estimation.
Beautiful. And a perfect place to end the talk. Thank you so much, Justin. And can you tell us, where can people find more about your work, Justin?
Surely, if you go to stillnessinthestorm.com, that is my website. Up at the top, there's a tab called social media, and you can see my Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and all the various other places that I post.
Wonderful. I thank you so much for joining us. And I think I got about 30 seconds, so let me just tell you that next week we have Maya Lynch joining us live from New Zealand. Boy, she's getting up early. She is the female Brian Forster. If you guys remember, Brian was on a few weeks ago. Maya explored the South Pacific and discovered the Samoan pyramids. Very interesting. She's going to talk about the Pacific Empire of Hawaii, electromagnetism at all these ancient sites. And what it's like to be the female adventurer that she is. And I'm looking forward. I didn't even know there were Samoan pyramids until she contacted me. So this is going to be a very, very interesting talk, and I'm looking forward to that. And for everybody else, please, by all means, check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Bernard Alex Alvarez, or join me on my website at bernardalvarez.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. We love you very, very much. Bye-bye.